15 minutes for a Q&A. And if you can please type any questions that you have in the chat, or we would love to see you as well. So feel free to turn on your audio and your video especially, and then we'll have a survey at the end for you to fill out. As you heard, we are recording this session. So for teammates that can't attend today, please encourage them to watch the recording afterwards, and we'll get the recording to you either end of day or first thing tomorrow. So again, welcome everybody. Excited to have Maurice and Chris here. And Maurice, I will let you take it away.
Cool, thanks, Zan. And remember, this is a workshop, not a speech, nor a pulpit at church where you just sit there and listen and not interact with each other. Chris and I really are energized by the more engagement we have. So either chime in, turn your audio in and ask a question, or even chat. Love to hear from you as we go through this. Go ahead, Zan, go to the next slide. One more. So let me start with, how many people have seen one of these name tags before? When you're walking into a meeting or a big room and all you have is the outfit you chose that afternoon, the cologne or the hairstyle you happen to have in that day, and the name tag on your shirt. And it's really, if you think about it, is exactly what brands do. It's, you've got what the brand name is, the packaging, and you've got to decide from very little data sometimes, are you going to like that person? Should you step up and talk to that person and try to interact with them and engage with them? Is there anything about that person that you're like, something is exciting, I'm curious to find out more? That's the challenge that brands have day in and day out in terms of how do they interact with a brand. Go to the next slide. So of course, as an intro for Chris and I's, who are we? As Dan said, my name is Maurice Coffey. Been working at Procter & Gamble for almost 25 years in counting, education-wise, just like you guys. Started in undergrad with a dual major in finance and marketing. Worked for Citibank for a few years on Wall Street, and decided I wanted to get into something much more entrepreneurial and stuff that meant something. And back then, banking wasn't necessarily something that you were building. You were more tearing it down and selling the parts. So getting into Procter & Gamble was something that really inspired me. If I think about who I am and what makes me me, it's my family, it's my personal piece. With my wife is at Procter & Gamble as well. We met the first year she came in, and she couldn't get rid of me. After that, the output of our union is two wonderful daughters. At least they are today. Ask me tomorrow how wonderful they are in terms of being a house full of wonderful women. I am a daughter's daddy. And what my interests are, which is largely driven by my two daughters, is high school volleyball. Because of all my personal time has gone to that, the rest of the interest really calls out kind of a time that I can re-energize myself. So big car enthusiast, competitive as heck. Not in the physical anymore as I've gotten older. So fantasy football is the way I sweat it out and look at data and try to talk stuff to my friends across the Zoom ways. And obviously the 3 years I've been working at Centrifuge, a huge passion of mine has been giving back. I did that all the time working with P&G in terms of mentoring folks, and that's just transferred into mentoring people who are interested in doing startups. One of the big things I'd say is just, if you see all the brands that I've worked in across my career, as I've asked myself, which I want to ask you guys. So get out a piece of paper. I can't tell if you're doing it or not. So I'll trust that you are, and write down your favorite 1 or 2 brands. And that'll be important as we go through this. For me, it's BMW, Apple, and that's probably a love-hate relationship if I'm honest, and Marvel. Good. Next slide. So I want to introduce our Chris to everyone. Chris.
Cool. Hey, hey y'all. Thank you for letting me be here today. I am here to support Maurice in any way I can. The good news is he's the lead actor and I'm the best supporting actor. Or you can say you got to buy one, get one free. You know, we say at P&G. But hey, my day job, I'm responsible for the North America skincare business in North America, which we consider to be US and Canada. I'm also responsible of global responsibilities for the Olay skincare brand around the world. Bit about my education: 92, graduated from Northern Kentucky University, so I'm a local through and through. I have a wife of 26 years. I have 3 girls, so just like Maurice, I'm a dad of girls: Ashton, Holden, and Marlo, 21, 16, and 12. Outside of work, I like to run and clearly know my priorities. They're all start with F's: faith, family, friends, fitness, and female beauty. It used to be
Nice.
fabric care, but when I moved back to beauty care, I went to the female beauty. I've worked on several brands globally, lived in Geneva for a while running global brands, and then also here in North America. But I'm thrilled to be with you today.
And Chris's favorite brands, as you see at the bottom.
Yeah, Nike, Gucci, and Carhartt. So a mix of things.
Very cool. And I saw some of you guys mention some of those very same brands too. So go to the next slide, Zan. What's the purpose of this workshop? And at the end of the day, Chris and I hope that you guys walk away with an understanding of brand building. I like to say it's not a passive activity. You're either helping build your brand, or through your inactivity, you're helping destroy your brand, and your competitors are doing a better job. But if you really step back as a consumer, think about the brands that you guys chose that you mentioned. What is it about those brands? And you go to the next slide, Zan. What is it about those brands from a consumer standpoint makes you feel that's the only choice in that particular category, in that particular segment? That's all the brand I can think about. That brand has my loyalty. What I also like you to think about is, if as an entrepreneur, a budding entrepreneur or a small business, if you had your wish and could wave a magic wand, what brand out there would you love to be responsible for because of how you identify with it? What's it do for you? What has it done for you? What are these brands doing to deserve the brand loyalty, the brand love that you guys are thinking of? I'd love for someone to kind of chime in and get on there to just give an example, name your brand, and what is it about that brand that made you choose that brand? I see Pete mentioned espresso. Oh, we've got someone on. Palash, you're on mute. What brand is your favorite brand?
I honestly, I like P&G, Skyline, and La Rosa's because they're all local brands. So like when they're local brands, you feel more connected to them.
So when you think about Skyline, what competitor brands would you automatically say, I would never go to that place, I'm always going to go to Skyline? Why?
I can't really think of any off the top of my head, but just any restaurants probably would be competitors for them. But I would choose Skyline over the other ones because they're local. Like I feel like they provide a more personalized experience.
There you go.
Each customer.
So when you say personalized, talk about, so when you go into that store, into Skyline, what is it that you can recall of why it makes it feel like so personable to you?
Oh, well, the person at the counter greets me properly, asks me what I want. And I mean, I think they have good discounts too. And like they really care. Yeah, they really care about the customer.
So a lot of things that you're saying, and Chris could probably chime in with this as well, is equity choices. There's a lot of folks at Skyline that pick the lighting, the choices on the menu, the way, making sure that greeter didn't just say, probably take a seat wherever you want. They probably had a conversation with you to make you feel like family.
Right.
Chris, what are you thinking? What thoughts?
And then, just like you said, you have a connection with them because they're local. They know me. They know something about me. And as Maurice was saying, you go in the decor, the skyline of Cincinnati is wrapped around the building. So it reinforces this is a local hometown thing, that you feel good about the choice to go there and spend time and give your time to them.
Yeah.
And Zach, it looks like you're on the opposite. You would pick Gold Star. You want to share why you would pick Gold Star? And I don't want you and Palash to get into any video fights or anything, but why would you pick Gold Star?
No, I was just saying when he couldn't think of a competitor, Gold Star's the biggest competitor. I'm Skyline all the way. I mean, I've only lived in Cincy for 5 years, but I know quality chili when I taste it. But yeah, I was just trying to help with a suggestion for a competitor there.
Perfect. I mean, and that's important because of the choices that Skyline is making can't be done in context of what they know Gold Star is actually going to be doing.
Yeah. Hey, one thing, Maurice, just to jump in. Zach,
Please.
any idea what was the first chili place in Cincinnati?
Dude, I have absolutely no clue, but I know it wasn't Texas style.
Well, thank you for that. It was Dixie Chili.
Dixie
They were
chili?
around, which no one's heard of. They're still around, but they were here 30 years before Skyline. But guess what? Skyline came in and started marketing their product and creating a brand. And now Skyline is dominant in the city and has recognition at the top of the list.
Think about that. That's a great example, Chris, in terms of you can have the best product, but if nobody knows about it, or you aren't really thinking about all the different things that both you and Palash mentioned about why you love Skyline. You mentioned a few things besides just the taste of the chili. I mean, it's the greeting, it's the way it makes you feel when you walk. So all those, it walks into the restaurant. All those things are choices that need to be made and thought through because it's going to impact how people think about your brand. Go to the next slide, Sam. So when you see this, and it's really about the power of brand meaning, standing out in the crowd of substitutes. And that we had that perfect example of Skyline versus Gold Star. If you close your eyes, I'm sure the folks can think differently about when you think of Gold Star. There may be equity or choices that you think about and the way it makes you feel when you walk into that establishment, or you see a can of Gold Star chili at your local Kroger versus the type of things that come to mind when you think about Skyline. Brand meaning, what we've learned over our years, is really about the why behind the what choices that you make. So it's more than just great tasting chili. I would imagine the folks at Skyline sat back and really thought through, what is it about chili? What is it about being a local brand from Cincinnati? What kind of connections that do we need to make so that folks feel like you're part of the family? So it's more than just the functional benefit of great tasting chili. Everybody knows you want to enjoy the food and the taste that you eat, but there are a whole lot of other elements that really dial up kind of what is that meaning for the brand? What's the promise that they're making to every time a consumer walks into that restaurant? What type of personality? If you had to think about the personality of someone of Gold Star, how would you contradict that or contrast that to the personality of a Skyline chili? It's really about that underlying motivation that drives why a brand does what it does as it interacts with its customers to fulfill its promise. So as I ask you guys a question, who can define what they think or what they believe equity means? What is brand equity? Anybody want to take a shot? Looking at the chats. We're giving out prizes to Skyline Chili for those that, no, just kidding. Go to the next slide. Back in 2007, and Chris probably remembers this as well. Go to the next slide, Sam. We really wanted to understand the power of brands, knowing that it wasn't just about the benefits, the functional benefits of the brand, but what does the brand mean? How do we match up against the top brands of the world? And back in 2007, we worked with Millard Brown, and we stepped back and said, let's look at the top brands that consumers dictate of why they love those brands and what are the biggest, most valuable brands. And it's not from a company perspective, but literally being able to tease out the value of those brands. This was the most recent, because Millard Brown actually came up with a great process, and since then they've been doing it every year. I'm sure that Chris and I can looking for Christmas cards in terms of being able to help them develop this huge research that they built off of us, because it's really popular now. But they go through every year and they look at over the past 5 years, how powerful have those brands been? And if you think about it, it's also in the context of over 5 years, what are they doing to establish value? So when you look at Apple, it's really the Apple brand, not necessarily the value of the Apple company. Or when you think of P&G, it's not Procter & Gamble, the entire company, of which we probably have 300 plus brands across the globe. It's teasing out what does a specific brand mean in terms of consumers, in terms of brand value, in terms of their growth over those 5 years. And this is the top list of 25. As you look at this list, any surprises and this is global, any surprises of the brands that you see on this list right now? Because I got to tell you, from 2020 to 2007, this list has changed quite significantly. And think about, this was coming off of COVID. So a lot of the brands were challenged in terms of their businesses literally going away. And it's the strongest brands, and Chris will tell you, the strongest brands really are able to go through the storm and be resilient and be there when consumers are back to return to be loyal. So I'll pause. Any surprises of this list?
I think the Home Depot is kind of interesting. At number 16, I'm kind of surprised it's like behind Nike and UPS and all those brands. But I think it's because of the COVID year, because many people wanted to work on their homes. I think even the real estate market kind of boomed. So
Very
like people
good.
were worried about like their homes because they were in there the whole time. So I guess Home Depot kind of got the benefit from the pandemic.
Very good insight. I mean, think about the different brands. But before, there weren't any Chinese-based brands on the top 25 list. Now, I think that in terms even the top 100, there's 17 Chinese brands on the top 100, and you've got a company like Alibaba. Does everyone know who Alibaba? What they do? They are the Chinese version of Amazon, pretty much in terms of online e-commerce and retail. And like Palash was saying, think about what consumer habits have changed since COVID and during COVID, and what will continue to evolve. And the brands that were best positioned, like an Apple, like a Google, or even payment term companies like a Visa or MasterCard, those that never have been that high before. Now they're very valued because they figured out they were positioned to really figure out how to drive the greatest value to the consumer base. Chris, when you see this list, any things that surprise you?
Well, I mean, I think here in the US, we all see Amazon at the top, right? With COVID, how many of those trucks and boxes do you see coming?
Exactly.
So they have done a great job. And I think that's a great insight on the Home Depot. You know, in the times of uncertainty, people were at their house and they needed help, and Home Depot was there. So I think them, you know, rise in a value and equity standpoint.
Yep. And even when, as I said before, if you look on the next slide, Zan, some of the notables, Nike, which is one of Chris's favorite brand, was in the top, was top 21. One of my favorite brands, BMW, of course I had to show that, was brand number 61 and what they resonate. And Pampers and Gillette, two P&G brands. And again, the brand itself, not the whole holding company, made it in the top 10 as well. And if you think about it, as we were saying before, when you think about Pampers, hopefully it's more than just a piece of moisture wicking material that you put in your baby's butt. There's a lot of emotional context. I'd almost argue that Pampers can pretty much defines the category of diapers. And I think that's what you'll see that's relevant in all of these top 25 brands, is that they really represent the category prototype. When you think about those brands, they've been able to sustain over the years and really define that category. Even when you think about Gillette, some of the surprises, TikTok, some of these brands, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, did they exist 15 years ago? And here they are because of the trends in the category and really being able to identify with its consumers, are making the top list. I thought it was also interesting to look at the ones that kind of lost favor. Wells Fargo. Does anybody know what could possibly have caused Wells Fargo to drop from 16 to 42 and it's between 2015 and 2020? At the scam. Trisha said scam. Exactly. So it's not just a bank that takes your money and gives you interest. It's what do you stand for as a banking institution? Pete Backshaw says overselling. So as I said before, brand building is proactive. It's a proactive exercise. The things that you do, how you do it, is going to impact how consumers think about you in the category.
Yep. And brands are never perfect. So you never get to the end of the journey and get to perfection. Brands are always a work in process. So every day it's waking up to figure out how do we improve the brand to help the consumer live a better life.
Exactly. Well said. You go to the next slide, Zan. Because as you step back and data analysis junkies, as Chris and I are at Proctor, what's driving this? I mean, it's great to see those top lists. What is it about those brands that we can learn from, that we can replicate or really understand what makes them sustainable over time? A lot of these brands in the top 25 actually, while every company lost value during COVID, these brands actually grew pretty quickly and responded back when everyone was slowly returning back to their normal routines, because these are the brands that consumers trust. And that isn't something that's built overnight. That's something that's built over time. So in this chart, you'll see, okay, I'm getting all kind of notices on my screen. What you'll see is the top 6, this report listed like 20, but I didn't want to put you guys to sleep, but these are the top 6 that I thought were most important in terms of what is it that these brands do that resonate. They're creative, they're very innovative. They don't just rest on their laurels, and they're constantly trying to figure out from their products and the positioning, how do they create a competitive advantage versus everyone else in their category. They take a stand, and a lot of times that's very risky. It's not just consumers, especially, and I know you guys hate to be called millennials, but consumers really, it's not just about buying a product. You want to buy a product and spend your money on a brand that shares similar values as you do. So a lot of these brands that you saw on that list, you've probably seen advertising or marketing that really went beyond just selling you a widget or a product. It really had them align themselves to a purpose or a value or commitment that they felt based upon their understanding of you as a consumer, things that were important to you. Keeping it fresh constantly. Again, as Chris says, it's not something just getting out there and resting on your laurels. You constantly have to stay in tune with what's going on in the category, what's going on with your consumers. And as you guys know, from school and just life, success breeds competition and imitation. So you really, brands really can't just, what was the most popular food since we're on food? Was it Popeyes with the chicken sandwich? After they got that huge success, how many other restaurants ran out and upgraded their chicken sandwich? People are constantly going to copy, and you got to constantly, and I think it's fair to say in the top 25 brands, those brands are constantly making sure that they keep it fresh. And the last 3, I think, are kind of graduating class in terms of the things that really great brand builders do. 1, they form and serve their communities. Again, it's not just selling product. A Nike goes beyond just selling Michael Jordans. They invest in the community and build basketball courts. They support AAU teams. They really start figuring out how do they establish relationship from consumers from the very beginning. But the point on showing humility, we used to think about this at Procter quite a bit years ago, and that's not all brands, not all consumers want brands to be the hero. The greatest brands enable the consumers to be the hero, really talking up the consumer and providing capability and empowerment to that consumer. Chris, you work in Olay, so I know you can talk about that. It's not necessarily people running to buy Olay because of the Olay brand. It's probably because you've done homework in terms of really what using Olay does for women.
Yeah, a few things to add on there, Maurice. The first is, hey, keep it fresh. So if you're a brand, a company, an entrepreneur, there's always tension about the tried and true products and the new products. Okay. When you're saying, hey, I'm going to rest on the great products I have, then you're not seen as innovative. Then when you innovate too much, you're confusing the consumer. So what I have found of, working on brands like, say, Old Spice, Tide, Downy, Olay, for a few, it's 80-20. 80% we're going to keep the best of the best, and then we're always going to bring out 20% new because we want to be fresh for the consumer. But it's a very important, brands must stay fresh. Yep. The second in there, you talked about competition. I was off Olay for about 6 years, and when I came back, they said, hey, the good news is competition hasn't copied us in the 6 years. I'm like, that is the worst thing that's happening, because that means you're not doing anything worthy of being copied. So, and it's a mindset to say, if we are doing something well as a brand, our competition is so fast out there right now, we're only going to get 3 to 6 months head start on them. So I want to see our competition copying us at some point, because every time I think we're going to do it better, because we're going to understand the consumer better, we're going to understand how to talk to him or her through media, and we're going to have the best people that bring it to life. Then from, beyond skincare, yes, we want to sell them a cream, but they want to know what you stand for. So we're talking all about, we are going to face the STEM gap when it comes to women. We're going to double the number of women in STEM and triple the number of women in color STEM. Because right now that there's a big gap, and you're like, why would Olay do that? Why would the skincare brand do that? There's a lot of science in every jar. We have over 200 female scientists work day in and day out on the technology that goes into every jar. So the people are working on it, and we want to bring that to life for our consumers. And it's really resonating well, especially with the younger consumer.
That's huge. That's huge. Thanks, Chris. And if you go to the next slide, that's really leads us up to, so what is brand ideal and brand purpose? We talked about equity, the kind of the hardcore, the taste of the chili, the onions, or the three, what is it, 3-type, 5-type, how they differentiate the different elements that you throw in the chili, and even the skincare. You look in the back of a jar of Olay and it tells you what the benefits are, but there's so much more, so much credibility and history that goes into that jar of Olay that resonates with consumers. And it's because they've gone beyond just a brand idea. They really start pushing on the brand ideal with an L. So when you look at these 4 brands, do you guys recognize these? Who can list off, say, tell me that, well, obviously Tempest. Well, who can tell me what all 4 of these are? Is anyone out there that doesn't recognize these 4 brands? Looking at chat, no one's talking. Well, it's really because they've been able to transcend just a product benefit to a product ideal. So instead of just saying what a brand stands for, so Olay stands for skincare, but why does the brand exist? What Chris was telling you in terms of the STEM programs, it's the empowerment of women, empowerment of, when you look in that mirror in terms of your skincare, there's a lot of history, a lot of emotional context that goes into the way you look, the way you want to look, the way your mom took care of her skin, the way your grandmother took care of her skin. There's a lot of history and emotion that the best brands channel that because they know their consumers so well. So when you think about Apple, yes, they're smartphones, but why does Apple exist? Think about in your mind all the advertising, the communication, and when you go into the Apple store, is it really about buy the cheapest computer with the most gadgets, or is there an experience and emotional connection where you think about Apple? The Tampax, yes, it's feminine protection, but be a girl like a girl. I mean, that's a context and a position that Tampax is positioned itself over years to be more about just feminine protection, but the empowerment that comes from being able to have a woman not care or not be limited by that part of nature. And I'm sure all of you can remember when mom either gave you a handful of Cheerios or Goldfish, that there's more than just the taste of the cracker that made it fun. So the Goldfish is much more than just a cracker snack. Does this make sense? I can't see anybody nod out there. That the best brands go beyond just defining what they do, but they're able to say why they do it and what impact they want to have on consumers in the world. And I think that alone separates the best brands from those that aren't the best brand building. Does that make sense? If you go to the next slide, we'll talk about it just a little bit more in terms of the role of a purpose to have that, as it says up here, the compelling people-serving aim of the brand. I mean, you want to, if Chris picked Carhartt, Chris, why didn't you pick Patagonia or Spider or name another adventurous? What was it about Carhartt that you identify with?
Yeah, when you think of Carhartt, it's like it came their DNA, their roots is the hardworking construction worker. So this is something durable, it's tough, it can last. And now they've sort of bridged that into everyday fashion or everyday wear.
Yep, that's awesome. And if you look at the kind of examples that I pulled on here, it's one thing that they're able to define what shared values that Apple has, but then how do you connect that to a brand purpose? And you don't see selling computers, selling iTunes, selling watches. You don't see that as part of their brand purpose. What Apple says is they exist to help creative people with a passion to change their world. I mean, that resonates. At least it resonated with me with Apple, was why it's my favorite brand. But it's that love-hate relationship, because now I feel trapped by Apple because everything I do is connected to an Apple device. But we can talk that another day. That's almost a negative, positive, evil of being connected to some of the greatest brands, because they know you so well that they surround you with being able to continue to enable you with their products and services. And before I leave this, as you guys think about creating brands, working for brand companies, why purpose is so important, and Chris, you could probably share a little bit of this being a leader of people. Having a clear identity and brand purpose not only enables you to connect to your consumers, but it also is a reason why your organization gets out of bed in the morning and spends their time trying to bring that purpose to life. It allows you to really communicate to the folks that touch your brand, as well as the people that consume your brand. Chris, you want to provide a little insight on that?
Yeah, I would just say it. If you're going on a trip, you know where you're going. So if you're going to Atlanta, you know where that is on the map. If you're going to Destin, Florida, you know where that is. If you're going to Pasadena, you know where you're headed. Organizations and consumers need to know that North Star of where the brand is going so they can know, do they want to be on that journey with you?
And there's so many different organizations and functions of people that touch your brand that you want to give, as Chris said, a map, a compass, so that they know kind of that joint reason and that passion point of why everyone is doing what they're doing to serve the consumers and their communities. And that's what's also important of a brand builder stepping back and saying, why am I doing this? What is the real purpose? What am I trying to establish for people? So that's the soft and feel and touchy piece. I wouldn't be a Proctor person. Chris wouldn't be. That wouldn't be true if we didn't get into strategy of. So how the heck do you start there? What are the things that you need, choices that you need to make? How do these brands actually do that? And Proctor has a long history, and we think about a brand building framework. If you think about it, 300 brands in a company, and I'd say Unilever has the same challenge. Coca-Cola with Fanta and 7-Up and the different versions of Coke, they all have to figure out how do they continue to replicate the success that they have from brand to brand and from marketing team to marketing team. And it's really behind establishing a strong strategy, a point of view that can be repeated and can be fixed and evolved. When COVID hit, brands that had strong strategy and rationale could really go back and challenge themselves of what needs to change. What do we need to do differently given consumers aren't going to the movies anymore? Think about how many apps that you ended up convincing your parents or you guys actually bought to consume content because you didn't feel comfortable going to AMC anymore. That's all of those choices that those companies made was largely built upon strategy. And we're going to spend a little time now to really take you a little bit through strategy so you can say, what do I need to do? I have a brand idea. Where do I start? And it's really around the basic principles of brand building framework. Next slide. So I just said this, mentioned this in the conversation. Strategy is important. To be able to repeat this of every brand that you have or every different products and lineups that you roll out, you want it to repetitive. You want to be able to go back to say, am I making the right choices? The consumer is feeding back to me what we're communicating to them. And when competitors come in and try to copy me and follow me, they see what I did. They don't necessarily see why you've done it. So strategy is very, very important. And we'll spend a little bit of time of breaking that down. Next slide. So brand building framework for P&G, the classic. Chris, I think we're on version 5.0 or 6.0 at this point. But
Yeah.
the basic fundamentals are these 4 principles. It's landscape, understanding your market and who you're competing in, the conditions of the marketplace that your product or idea is serving in. Understanding your who, that's your consumer, and that's where everything starts for companies like P&G, is truly understanding your who. Not only who you're trying to sell to, when they use your product, what does that mean? How's it impacting? What type of insights are being gained because they're choosing you and using your product? The what, that gets into the equity choices we talked about in terms of what are you standing for? What are the benefits that you're communicating? And then the most important thing in terms of going beyond strategy is what you execute. I mean, the best strategy is what consumers actually see you do in the marketplace. And that's through the principle that we kind of call the how. And there's 7 touch points, and I'll double click that soon to give you an understanding of kind of where we came up with the 7 touch points. Next slide. So we'll double click a little bit into each of these so you can really understand whether you guys have a brand idea that you want to sell, or you're going to have a career being a marketer one day or are one now. Understanding these 4 principles, I think, and Chris will probably back me on this, are critical in terms of you starting to think through building your brand and going from that idea to an ideal. We talked a little bit about the who, understanding the consumer behaviors. What we've learned year after year is that consumers may tell you one thing, but they may do something totally different. And true folks really understand beyond what a consumer might check in a survey. and really understand what motivates them to make the choices that they make. Again, we talked a little bit about the what. How do you establish your brand as the category prototype? Again, when you think about outdoor equipment, what brands come to mind? When you think about socks, when I say socks and buying socks online, what brand comes to your mind that really stands for that category? Anybody in the chat? The first brand I think about is Bombas. I don't think about Hanes. I don't think about all the other brands that you might pick up at Target or Walmart. Bombas is really established in a unique position in that category as a category prototype. And again, I'll quickly take you through the how and in terms of the choices, and then the importance of really understanding the category through landscape. Next slide, Zan. So let's start with the who. Who are your consumers? Understanding the consumer insights and their behaviors, not only what they tell you they do, but why do they do it? How do they, using your product or the brand or the service that you have in your mind that you want to share with consumers, how does it make them feel? Are those consumers, can you reach them? Are you really designing to appeal to those consumers so that you know what they're looking for, the choices they make, and you know everything you possibly can about the consumer as you're thinking about wowing them and designing product for them? Chris, how important is it for the category that you play in skincare to really understand that too?
Absolutely. And really focusing on one who that you think is big enough to make a difference. That galvanizes the organization to know, hey, this is our inspirational target. This is who we would like to win to buy our product. That will expand to other consumer groups. But if you try to design for 10 consumer groups, you're going to design for nobody. Right. So you really need to say, hey, I have this inspirational group. And by the way, they are big enough to influence the sales and deliver the results we need. So you have to do that hard work.
And don't let that be daunting. It could be as simple as having a pizza party with some friends in a room and really sitting them down and really asking them, why do they do what they do? What brands do they hate? What experiences do they try to avoid? And as much as what experience do they love? Really getting deep with consumers. So it doesn't have to require you to spend a lot of money or a lot of time to get close and insightful with your consumers. So never forget that step. Next slide, Zan. So this is the what. So again, when you think about socks, I said Bombas. When you think about bottled water as a category prototype, what brands come to your mind when I say bottled water? And don't say Kroger's Blue Label either. That's not fair for any Kroger folks on the phone. I think of food. There you go. Pilar says food, Fiji. And obviously, when you think about electric cars, there may be some folks that say Prius, but I think most folks are going to say Tesla because they own, thank you, Riley, they own the category. They've defined the category prototype, and everyone has to compete versus how they define the category. So they've gone beyond just functional benefits. One of the things I'll tell you is that there are 3 types of benefits. This will be pretty easy to understand. There's the functional benefit in terms of what a product physically does for you or service does. But then it's the emotional. How do you feel after using that product? What's the emotional takeaway? When you see a commercial from BMW, they're not necessarily talking about horsepower and stopping power and RPMs. It's that emotional connection that BMW gives you. And then what's the experience? When Paula said when he goes into a Skyline, that being greeted at the door, there's an experience that he expects. So whether he's going to Skyline downtown or up in Mason, there's an experience that you expect to be repeated. Understanding those core benefits and making choices in terms of the things that are going to make you stand out, the things that you just have to do because that's part of being in that category. Really understanding and being choiceful about those benefits are vitally important. Chris, all the benefits that you could choose to pack up into that jar, I'm sure there's a list, but what gives you confidence that you're picking the right ones?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. You have a lot of choices, right? On a product, there's a lot of benefits. So figuring out who is, who's the audience you want to talk to, and what's going to excite them to buy or be part of your product. And when we were working that on skincare, it was like, hey, this jar hydrates better than jars costing $100, $200, $300. So it's a great value. So we can say it in 8 words or less where she says, hey, I want to be part of that brand or buy that product. Talking Old Spice, back in the day when we did the body wash. Inspirational target, college, male, junior, because the young guys aspired up, the older guys out of college aspired back to the good old days. So that's our who. What do we want to tell them? Use the body wash. You'll smell so good that you'll get noticed. How are we going to tell it? At colleges, sampling. That's the program. So that's like the who, what, how of figure out how to bring a product to life.
Perfect segue. So the next one is the how, 7 touch points. And this is, again, I've been a Proctor for 25 years. I kind of know we were talking this before, kind of your professors are talking this, because we did a lot of research in what we would call the path to purchase. What are the steps that we feel that we could impact beyond just buy me? And it came out to be these 7 touch points. If you think about the first 3, awareness, browsing, buying. Awareness is what are we doing in terms of investing in marketing and make you know that Old Spice exists. Browsing, when you go and buy Old Spice, what choices are we making that match and are consistent with our brand purpose and ideal on the shelf, and where you can buy Old Spice such that it's resonating with what we know about you as a consumer? Do we know that at some point in your life, you're sending mom or letting dad pick it up, so you're telling mom and dad what to go buy, and therefore we need to make it easy for mom and dad to pick it out on the shelf? Or are you at the point where you're buying it yourself, so we need to think differently about what are the choices we're making to make it easy for you to pick Old Spice and not that cheap store label brand next to it? And then buying, how do we make it easy for you to buy? What brand choices are brands making that they had to quickly change when folks weren't leaving their house anymore? They weren't going to Kroger, they were ordering it online or going to Amazon and filling up their basket. How do we continue to make those choices such that making the buying process easier? And again, we know that those first 3 things, which are awesome, is all about trial. All the money that brands invest in driving trial, it really doesn't pay out until you decide to buy it again. So how do we get you to buy it again, use it? We got you all excited about getting that brand new scent from Old Spice, and you got it in your shower. We want you to use it so that you can buy another one. So what are the things we're doing in terms of usage on the choices and communication that we're doing on the package, showing other people, celebrities or people that you respect, using it and talking about it such that you remember, hey, I think my mom bought me that. Let me go pull that out and use it again because I forgot I had it. Remembering, repurchase, again, what choices are we making to make it easy for you to buy again because it's meeting your needs? And finally, probably the one that most people forget about is advocacy, and that's all word of mouth. The biggest driver of sales is telling your friend, wow, you should try this product. It is awesome. It works for me. It could work for you. So what are the things as a marketer that you're doing and choices you're making to make advocacy and driving word of mouth easy? So it's a lot of steps, but it's not that complicated when you really think about how do you influence that consumer, because you've done your homework, you know everything it is about them and what they're looking for. How do you make it easy for them to go through that journey from the first time they hear about that brand to the point to they're like Chris and myself that we shared with, and some of you guys have shared some of your favorite brands, to the point where you are advocates and you're telling everybody that you know that's the brand of choice for you because it's the brand of choice for me. Does that make sense? Any follow-up on that, Chris?
Nope. Well said.
So you put all that together, and it's the landscape assessment, the final principle, because everything, as you guys know, is about context. Environment may change, new consumers may change, trends may be coming down the pike. It's constantly, you need to be aware of the choices that you're making is never done in a bubble. It's always going to cause someone else, a consumer, a customer, a competitor, to react to what you're doing. So really understanding the different areas in terms of researching that category, understanding the market size. Is the market size big enough for you to be able to pay off the investment that you're making in that brand? Who's in that market space in terms of competitors? Who's winning? Who's losing? Why are they winning? Why are they losing? All of those things that you should really understand when you're going into trying to create a brand. And don't let that scare you. Procter and companies like us, we could spend millions and millions of dollars on research or we could have a pizza beer party with some friends and consumers and have them over for dinner and ask those same questions and everything in between. So don't let this part in terms of truly understanding the category in which you're playing scare you off, because that's job one, to figure out all the choices that you make on your who, your what, and your how have to be in context with the category in the marketplace that you're participating in.
Oh, and
Next
I
slide.
always, yeah, I would just add, I love competition. I think if you use it in the right way, they make you better. So how do you use your competition to inspire you and then challenge you to stay a step ahead? If you go to the Oakley area up there, there's like a Crossroads and there's a Crunch Gym, but there's a Cane's Chicken on one corner sitting there, okay? And then right next door, Chick-fil-A opened on the other corner. They both sell basically chicken, right?
That's a war zone.
You got it. So why do I stand there and watch? Cane's has 3 people in line at their drive-through. Chick-fil-A is back past Kroger's and has 25 people waiting to get their sandwich. So it's all about brand building. Use the competition to challenge you to become better, to drive your consumer experience.
Well said. Well said. This next section is, okay, how do you bring that to life? And of course, use the tried and true case study of Apple. We're going to go quickly through this. This is being recorded, and I think Zan and team have this presentation. So if you want to go back and do a little double click in terms of how Apple brings this to life, you can, but we're going to go pretty quickly through this to give you guys time to answer any questions at the end. So clearly, Apple used to be the #1 brand. Amazon has taken its spot, but I think it's still a lot of lessons to learn about why Apple is Apple. And it's got such a long history. It's fascinating, at least I thought. So to follow and see what choices they make to become one of the top resonating brand builders globally. Next slide, Zan. So if you think about all the different things that the Apple promises you, the real idea that they step back and say, think differently. I don't know if you guys remember the first commercial that Apple did in black and white and showing a woman running down the hall with all these stuffy executives in suits that was supposed to represent the competition, IBM, about how she threw the hammer and broke the glass of tradition. Apple wasn't competing at that time on faster computers or stronger thinking power. It was all about thinking differently, from design and the reason that you would use a computer and making a computer an everyday part of your life. And that was what, 2000, 1990, 20 years later. You can just see on this chart all the different choices that Apple has created to really understand how it brings that its purpose and mission to life, to where it's literally surrounding anything and everything you do.
Maurice, you're dating yourself. That was 1984.
84. Oh my
84.
gosh. Even more so. So they've truly been consistent over time. Next slide. So assess the landscape. So when we do this, and we've simplified it, but if you think about the lens of which the questions you ask, I'd recommend you think about what has worked in the past, what's happening now, and based upon the data and what you understand in that marketplace, what do you think is going to happen in the future? And really stepping back and asking yourself, as you think about your product or your brand, from a consumer and social context, in terms of how a consumer's thinking about your category, your product, what competition has done in the past, and how you're shoring up and how you're benchmarking yourself against competition, and really what your business objectives might be. So in the beginning, as an example, Apple really was pushing on performance and design and user experience. As they think about the future, it's about the ecosystem. So they moved from just being a hardware to also looking at software and ecosystem. So everything, and that's why I have this love-hate relationship with them, is everything I do starts and ends with an Apple device somewhere, somehow. But it's seamless, totally seamless. And again, that was thought through. That didn't happen by accident. Next slide. Knowing their consumer. So there's about 20 questions that you can ask. These are probably the top ones. Understanding what needs your target. As Chris said, you can't boil the ocean. You have to really pick which consumers you're really going to focus on. You can't be everything for everyone. So Apple didn't go after gamers. Apple didn't go after necessarily folks that required superstar spreadsheets and computer brains that do complex calculations. They found how to focus on consumers that needed the power of computing and content and organization to improve their lives. And that's who they target on, folks who appreciate simple design, and portability. Habits and practices, understanding why consumers do what they do and why they do it. Attitudes. If you think about Nike versus Keds versus Under Armour, probably three very different people or characters you have in your mind when you think about those three brands. So really understanding the attitudes and values of the consumers you're trying to interact with. And then obviously psychographics, demographics, and lifestyles, really understanding the age group that you're going after, the attitudes, as I said before, and identifying and knowing your consumer, and does your product and how does your product and services align to those consumer needs. Next slide. Real quickly on the what, again, what choices are you making from an equity standpoint? What choices are you making? As Chris said, never always being fresh. So what are the different innovation ideas that you're going to push forward with and drive, because you understand what your competition is doing, you understand where the category is going, and what type of choices do you want to make? Well, what was funny is when we looked at this years ago, we said, how would Procter, with our very, at that point, back in the day, our very functional focus, answer those questions? And how does Steve Jobs do it? Because people looked at him and thought he was crazy, kind of crazy genius. And no disrespect to Tim Cook, but kind of, as Chris said, I age myself and I think of Apple, I think of Steve Jobs. Very different in terms of how you would answer that question. And I show this contrast because I want to challenge you guys to understand both elements. And that's understand the functional and benefit, and really we're making a better product. It's better than anybody else out there, but it's also the soft emotional and experiential that's just as important and vital to separate yourselves from competition, and understand how Steve Jobs answered those same questions, if that makes sense. So it's really, you learn from the contrast. Next slide. And again, these are the 7 touch points. And instead of what I'll leave this with you guys to look at later, but as you look at the 7 touch points from awareness all the way to from advocacy, what I've put out here is, what questions do you think Apple has done to address those things? And when you think about that brand, what comes to your mind in terms of what you've experienced and how Apple's driven that? So for instance, purchasing. How does Apple help consumers make purchase decisions easily and with confidence? You're not going to Best Buy to buy an Apple product necessarily. You're not necessarily going to Walmart. You're going to an Apple store. And anyone that's been to an Apple store knows that that's an experience that's unique, that probably Apple spent a lot of time and thinking and strategy to put that store together the way they have to make that experience unique. I remember that, similar to what Chris was saying, from a Cane's versus Chick-fil-A. If you go to the mall, Kenwood Mall, there used to be a Microsoft store and an Apple store. Lines around the corner to get in the Apple store. And while you waited, you could go to the Microsoft store because there was nobody standing in that store until you can get your time back into the Apple store. Those are choices that are made at the strategic level. Next slide. And I think this wraps it up. So if you think about it, the key things Chris and I want you to take away from is, you need to understand your brand in every single detail. Because as I said, branding doesn't happen by accident. It's the choices that you make. It's the choices that you choose not to make. When you think about moving from a product idea to a product ideal, when you think about what your brand or product or services do, but then double clicking that and saying, why do we do it? Why are we doing what we're trying to sell and serve the consumers? That's vitally important. Next slide. Know how others see your brand. I'm sure that Chris over his career has written several strategy documents, and here's what we want the brand to stand for, and working with sales and product development to bring that to life. But then when he asks consumers, they may tell him very differently. It doesn't necessarily match what was printed on a piece of paper. So constantly being able to go back and forth and being sure that what you want consumers to take away, that they're actually taking that away.
Yeah, and with that, the consumer is the boss. it doesn't matter what we have on the PowerPoint or slides, it's what the consumer says about your brand. And when you say, hey, when you think of Apple, what are the 5 words or less they say when you think of Nike? That's what your brand equity is, like it or not.
Exactly. Well said. And then finally, and I said this a few times, brand building is not a passive activity. As soon as you put that open for business sign up, whether virtually or physically, you are now a brand builder, and you constantly have to make choices and changes and respond to what you learn and react in the marketplace to continue to build that brand. I think that's it. Zan, turn it back to you. There are people there. You're on mute, Zan.
Zan is on mute. That mute button.
I clicked it. I'm sorry about that. So
There
I've
you
been
go.
clicking a lot today. So thank you, Maurice. Thank you, Chris. I know we're getting a little short on our time, but can you all stay for just 2 minutes to answer a couple quick questions?
Sure.
I can.
Okay, great. All right, jump in, students.
I just wanted to say, Aman, you can go.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Mr. Coffey and Mr. Hyatt, for having this presentation. My question is, my name is Umanch. My question is, could you explain a little bit more about understanding consumer behavior? How do you get consumer insight if sometimes surveys can be inaccurate? And how do you do that on a large scale? Because we talked a little bit about that. You talked about how you could, you gave a little reference of how you could, like, invite a few people over, like a pizza party or whatever, and just talk about what brands they like and what they don't. But how do you do that on a large scale? And for especially when you think of Apple and the case study that we talked about, what I personally felt was that all these strategies could be implemented if the company was already set up. But how do you get started from brand building from the ground up? Like just a few words on that, please.
So yeah, hey, I'll jump in quickly. Hey, this is my advice on this. Number one is use consumers for inspiration versus validation. Okay, so I like the small informal. So first you need to define who that target is. Who do you want to go after? So let's go after Old Spice, college, junior males. So guess what? I went to NKU, I talked to 8 of them and we had pizza. And that's how we designed Old Spice body wash. But then you got to do the math, okay? As you're listening to them, are there enough college students out there to make it worth your while to sell Old Spice body wash? So that's a number exercise. But the inspirational exercise is sitting down over 1 hour out in Highland Heights, having pizza, hear what they like about your product, hear what they don't like, and using them for inspiration. The second you said is, how do you get a brand when it starts? The good news is you have a white sheet of paper. You develop what you think the brand is, and you start building it with the consumers, and they will tell you quickly what they like and don't like. And I would just encourage you to listen to them. When they're telling you something, say, I'm going to change, I'm going to try something else until you get it right.
That was a perfect response. I can't add value to that one.
All right, great. Well, thank you. I know we're at our time at 1 o'clock, so thank you very much. Chris and Maurice in particular, excellent, excellent presentation. So just a reminder, this is recorded, so we'll get the recording out to you. And then finally, our next event is Thursday at noon, lawyers, advisors, mentors, frenemies, and noise. Who really matters and when, what's help and what's a distraction. So stay tuned for that on Thursday. Thanks again.
Thanks.
Awesome.
Zan,
Take
for
care,
having me.
everybody.
Thanks, guys.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.